it might get a little hot. This one might get a little heated. I'm talking about doing it for yourself, and mostly I'm talking about thinking. And I'm going to share some opinions, some facts, and some other things when it comes to thinking for yourself, psychological tricks that we all have wired into us, and the concept of ODD, which is considered oppositional defiance disorder. That's what I'm going to be talking about today, right after I remind you guys that October 20, is it 8th? I think it's the 28th, Friday. It's Friday. The Friday the 28th, we're going to be having our huge Halloween bash, over 25,000 pieces of candy to give away. Make sure you come out. We're going to be doing it between 6 and 9 p.m. We'll have some like horror style face painting going on. It's almost all completely free. The only thing that's not free would be the face painting. There's a lady coming in, a student of ours that does a phenomenal job, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And then, right after that, we have our tournament team that's going to be heading to Springfield on November 5th, so wish them luck. And then after that, from the 13th to the 21st, we're going to be having our annual pre-holiday sale where you can get all kinds of stuff like $100 gift cards for like 30% off. You can get discounted tuition, discounted gear, discounted uniforms, anything you might have been needing, right? So keep the lookout for that. It's going to be coming up real soon. Now, do it for yourself. Let me talk about thinking for yourself for a second. It's actually a lot harder than a lot of people realize. A lot of people think they do think for themselves and yet fall back on these psychological principles, right? That we all have, these little hardwired things inside of us that basically tell us how to think. They're shortcuts, okay? So our brain is wired to take shortcuts when it comes to making decisions because for our own survival in the past, it has been necessary to make decisions in a quick way. So we use a lot of different things to help us make these shortcut decisions. One of those things is social proof, right? So if we see someone else doing something, then we know we should probably do something. Like a great example of this is a bunch of studies they did in New York after this lady was like killed on the streets and a bunch of people saw it happen, but like no one did anything. They did a bunch of studies about this by having people fake a heart attack and whatnot on the streets and see if anyone would help. And most of the time, I'm talking like 80% of the time, nobody would help unless one other person started to help first. And then once they see someone else helping, then people know what to do. And like, oh, if he's doing that, I should help out too. And they jump in and start to figure it out, right? This is just one of many things our brain does to sort of make it easier to make decisions. And so we will look at something that we view as a person we view as truthful, a person we view as honest, or even if they're not, doesn't matter, or something along those lines, and we will believe whatever their opinion is because we feel like that person is like us. So if we see someone and we think, hey, that person's a lot like me, then whatever their opinion is, we'll have a tendency to take that opinion to avoid taking the time it is necessary to actually look into all the stuff to form an opinion for ourselves. This is just an unfortunate fact of psychology. It's just how our brains work. This is kind of a thing. So what does that have to do with oppositional defiance disorder and ODD? Well, let me tell you, we deal with a lot of people in here, particularly kids, who get diagnosed with ODD. And I have my own opinions about ODD, but this is just an opinion. I'll say this. I don't think ODD is a bad thing. I don't think oppositional defiance disorder is a bad thing at all, right? Now, this is different from RAD, right, which is sort of like opposition defiance disorder, but it's trauma based, okay? And that's different. ODD is simply usually tacked on with people with ADHD and things along those lines. Are very logical people. Sometimes people on the autism spectrum, they get this title of ODD, oppositional defiance disorder, because they will tend to refuse to do things or follow rules or something like that they should, and so they get this tag. When they don't listen to the teachers and they don't listen to whatever. Honestly, I love having these kids in the dojo because it's like magic. From like the first, second, maybe third time they come into class, they're listening to our instructors, they're following instructions, they're good to go, they follow the rules, and they don't seem to have oppositional defiance disorder. And let me kind of explain. This is just my opinion. Like I said, I don't think ODD is a bad thing because what it is at its core, you've got a person that's really logical, right? And they want things to make sense. They want things to make logical sense. And this is why it usually comes along with ADHD or autism spectrum and things along those lines. This person that wants everything to make sense doesn't necessarily just accept people as their authority or as the authority. So at its core, people with opposition defiance disorder are people who question everything. People who, well, why? Why do I have to sit still? Why do I have to do this homework? Why do I have to do this? Why is this a rule? And oftentimes that when they are, let's say, rebelling against a particular demand or something that they need to do, it often comes out very emotional, right? So they don't come across, because it's usually with kids, right? And they don't come across calmly because they don't know how to express themselves very well verbally yet, right? So they don't come across calmly. They come across a little bit more angry, like, well, I don't want to do that. Well, why would I do that? No, I refuse. Or they might just like stare you in the eye and go ahead and do the thing that you told them not to do. Why? Because they don't believe the consequences, right? So the reason they do this is because they want to know logically why they have to follow that rule, why this thing is important for them to do, right? They want to make the decision for themselves, which is why I don't see ODD as a bad thing. These are kids that want to make decisions for themselves. These are kids that want to know why things are the way that they are. And so, yeah, they can be a little bit defiant when you don't tell them and when you don't make things make sense to them so that they can make that decision on their own. But then we get these kids with ODD, they come in here, and of course they're defiant at first. I don't want to do that. I'm not going to do that. And then you say, so then we usually say something along the lines of, well, this is why we need to do it. Well, I don't want to follow that rule. I don't want to sit still. Well, the reason we need to do it is to make sure that no one else gets hurt. See, there's people going to be moving around you, and if you're not sitting still, you're swinging your arms around. You could trip somebody. They could get hurt. Someone could step on your hand. Your finger could get broken, right? And we just tell them these are things that could happen, real world consequences that make perfect logical sense. And the face just changes, and they're just like, okay, and they go along with it, right? And it's amazing. It's amazing. It's not every time, right? But it's amazing how often this happens when we have a child come in and they say, I don't know if you guys will be able to handle him. He's been diagnosed ODD. He's oppositionally defiant. So anything you ask him to do, he's going to fight you on. He's going to fight you on it tooth and nail. But in the end, the problem is the reason they're fighting people on it is because they don't understand why they're doing it, right? They don't understand why it's a rule. They don't understand why they need to do it. They don't understand what the consequences of them doing it might be. And no one sits there and explains to them the consequences and explains to them why. And especially before it becomes emotional, right? So the trick is to get them when they very first start, when they very first know I don't want to do that. And then if I try to push them to do it, they're going to get more and more emotional, get more and more frustrated. And the more I push them and the more frustrated they get, the less likely I'm ever going to be, no matter what I do, to be able to bring them around to following that rule or doing whatever it is they need to do, homework or otherwise. But if as soon as they start saying, no, I'm not doing that, I say, well, okay. Well, if you don't do it, here's a consequence that could happen. Or if you do it, here's the reward you're going to get. And here's the thing about oppositional defiance disorder too that not a lot of people realize. Because one of the things that defines it is that rewards or promise of rewards will not help them be more obedient, for lack of a better term, because these are people that generally, and this comes along, like I say, with ADHD and the spectrum, that generally don't care about your rewards. So rewards aren't generally the way to go. I know we talk about rewards being a great way to go in behavior management for most people, but for this kind of kid, right, for this kind of person, this ODD person, rewards don't mean anything, and they can be stubborn, man. They can be extremely stubborn. Like, if this was kind of a more talked about thing when I was a kid, I would have been considered ODD. Why? Because I questioned everything. Someone said I had to finish my meal and I was full and they want to finish my meal. I say no. They said, well, if you finish the meal, we can go get ice cream. I said, I don't care. I don't care. No, I'm not doing it. Well, and then, it would just go on and on. Well, we'll just sit here and you can't get up until you finish your meal. Okay, well, we'll sit here then. That's kind of a good marker of oppositional defiance disorder. That's kind of what it looks like, right? And then they get really, really stubborn. But if someone takes someone who's oppositionally defiant about something and gives them a logical, good reason that gets them to convince themselves that this is the right thing to do, then that's a lot better. And you can do that through either pointing out the negative consequences of not doing it, or you can do that by saying why it's a rule or why you want to do things. Now, here's where it becomes ODD and where people start to have a problem with it is when, that's a great example. We're going to sit here until you eat the rest of your dinner. Well, if I'm full and my stomach tells me I'm full and I don't want to eat anymore, then it's going to be really hard for you to convince me on why I should finish my plate, right? You can talk about starving kids in Africa. You can talk about rewards. You can talk about punishments, and none of it is going to mean anything, right? None of it's going to mean anything because my body says, "Nah, I'm done eating," right? So I'm not going to eat anymore. And it's going to be hard for you to formulate an argument, to formulate a logical reason that would convince me of why I need to eat that food, right? Like you can't exactly convince me if I don't eat it I'm going to die, or if I don't eat it I might get really sick, or if, I don't eat it I might get hurt. And if that's the case and you can't convince me of a good reason that I need to eat the rest of that dinner, then I'm not going to. And so where ODD becomes an issue with people is when you have these kids who you say something like eat the rest of your dinner, or clean your room or something like that, and then they say no, or maybe even ask why, and you can't tell them why. Why don't you just do what I say? Because the house needs to stay clean. That's why. Stuff like that. That's not gonna convince them. That's not gonna fly for someone with ODD. That's not a convincing enough argument. It's got to be like, well, if you don't keep your room clean, your room might become filled with roaches and mice, and they might crawl in your mouth when you sleep. That's pretty gross. Oh yeah, I don't want that. Okay, maybe I'll go clean my room, right? A real world consequence that makes logical sense. If you can bring that into the equation when you're talking to kids and people with ODD, then it is amazing how quick they can turn around. The thing that makes them difficult to deal with is that they don't trust authority automatically. They don't trust authority. They don't trust your authority. They don't trust the rules. And they if they can't see a logical reason for it, if they don't see a reason for behaving in a certain way or doing a certain thing that you want them to do or whatever, and you just keep telling them, well, because it needs done, because it has to be done, or whatever, without like giving an actual logical reason, then the more defiant they're going to get, and they're going to get more and more and more defiant, and because they don't see you as an authority. The thing about kids with ODD is they are wired a little bit differently. They don't automatically come out and look at their parents and go, they're the authority, and look at their teachers and go, they're the authority, and look at the cops and go, they're the authority. They don't automatically do that. They don't. And to me, I hate to say this, my opinion, that's like the most American thing ever, right? Coming out of the womb being like, I don't trust your authority, and making people who want to be their authority, such as their parents, their teachers, etc., and they make those people jump through hoops to earn their trust as an authority. And once you earn their trust as an authority, then someone diagnosed with ODD will begin to trust your authority. Now, not on everything. You have to re-convince them that you can be trusted as the authority on each new thing, right? On each new thing. Because the thing about people with ODD is they generally don't take it in a broad term, meaning that if you're the parent and you want to be seen as the authority, and you earn the trust as an authority over a certain thing, as in you give them a good logical reason for following a certain rule or whatever, that doesn't mean that they're going to follow you unquestioningly on the next one, right? Because they see each individual situation as different. They see each individual circumstance as completely different. And because the circumstance is different, that means you have to reprove, right, that you are the authority that can be trusted and listened to. And so that's, man, it's a huge thing. And so, like, I hate to say this because it's a controversial opinion, and I was worried the comments would get heated. So far, there's been nothing in the comments, or a little bit in the comments, but nothing, heated. But I was afraid to get a little bit heated for my opinion. But my opinion, ODD, it may be a pain for you if you're a parent and your child has ODD. It may be a nightmare at times. But I don't see ODD as a bad thing. I see it as one of the most American things ever. It's just questioning everything. Like, a person with ODD, a kid with ODD that grows up, they're not going to just trust what they see on the news. They're not just going to trust what a politician says. They're not just going to trust anything. They're going to look for the reason that it makes logical sense. That's what they're going to look for. And when they can find a way that it makes logical sense, or someone can explain it to them in a way that makes logical sense, then they will begin to trust that authority on that particular topic, right? So dealing with kids and people with ODD, yes, it can be very difficult. But once you begin to understand the psychology, how this person is thinking, and what they're thinking about, and what their concerns are, and things along those lines, then it becomes actually really easy to deal with people with oppositional defiance disorder, or whatever you want to call it. In the end, all it really is a natural tendency to question all authority, to question all rules, to question all commands, right? And they'll question it. And then they will, if you can't provide a good reason, you can't be logical and provide a good reason for it, they will simply fight you on it, and they will become extremely stubborn, and no amount of promise of reward, no amount of promise of punishment is going to move them. They will get super stubborn on it, and this is where like it gets the disorder part of it. It's a disorder because once they get to this point, they will not budge on that subject. But in all reality, you can get them to budge on any subject so long as you recognize that all they're doing is saying, I don't trust you as an authority, and I need you to explain this to me logically, why I need to follow this rule, why I need to clean my room, like so that it doesn't get bugs or whatever, right? Like it just has to be something that makes logical sense that's going to convince themselves that whatever you're asking them to do is the right thing to do and that they really need to do it, right? But they have to convince themselves. So at its core, my opinion about oppositional defiance disorder is that it is not a bad thing at all. I feel like it is probably a phenomenal trait because there are too many people that are using the things I said at the beginning of this video, things that most of us are psychologically hardwired to do to cut down time on decision making, because our survival relies on our ability to make decisions faster and faster and faster. That's kind of been the case for hundreds of years, right? And so we've kind of evolved these tricks that to help make decisions faster, as in if I see somebody that looks like me, if I see somebody that I think is a little like me and they have a particular opinion on something, then I will have that opinion on something. And this is kind of the big problem when we talk about, people, man, this past several years has been a great example of this. I hate to sound excited about it, but psychologists will be studying this stuff for years and years and years to come. But that's why it was so easy for a lot of people to see one opinion piece on the news or some opinion broadcaster and be like, that guy looks like me and thinks like me, and so then I'm gonna go ahead and just believe every word they say without checking it for myself, without any critical thinking skills. That's a normal thing that's hardwired into our brain so that we can make decisions faster. If I don't know what to decide, I can look at somebody who seems to be like me, who seems to look like me, and I'll adopt their opinions. This is something we do naturally as social creatures, right? As society, as human, right? We do that. When we don't know what to do and we don't know what to think, we look at other people, and the people that look like us and the people that seem to think like us, those are the people that we're going to look to, and we're going to adopt their opinions, regardless of what their opinions are. And it's just one of many ways we use shortcuts to make decisions. Here's the thing, though. Politicians, advertisers, marketers, myself included, I do advertising and marketing, right? We take advantage of this all the time. We take advantage of your hardwired sort of systems to shortcut decision making. So every piece of content that gets written as an ad or as marketing, every speech given by a politician, every stance taken by a politician is carefully weighed out psychologically to basically take a certain demographic you want to reach and use those little shortcuts, kind of inspire them to use those little shortcuts in their mind to make decisions without fully looking into everything involved in the decision, without fully looking into everything that might go into it, right? Without fully researching the situation. This is what marketers do. This is what advertisers do. This is how they sell milk. This is how they sell everything on the TV. This is how they sell health insurance. This is how they sell everybody. Everybody that sells uses these against you. Okay, they use that. So haven't you ever like saw an advertisement or saw something on Amazon and then bought impulsively? There's a good chance that the advertisement that you saw or heard, or that the content on it, that somebody spent hours and hours and hours on that little piece of content, just a couple of sentences, in order to say it in just such a way to convince you to bypass any sort of critical thinking and get you to decide for yourself. That's why, like in marketing, one of the biggest things to do is whatever demographic you're trying to reach, you want to make sure that all your advertising visuals look like the same people as the demographic you're trying to reach. Why? Because if someone is watching it and they see someone that looks like them who says a certain thing or has a certain opinion, they're more likely to go ahead and believe what that person has to say, right? Boom. Why is it that, all the time on supplement commercials and stuff like that, you'll see, it'll pop up somebody dressed as a doctor and it'll say Dr. So-and-so, and in really tiny letters it'll say paid actor, right? I know we've all seen it. I don't know if you ever noticed the paid actor. A lot of times there's a little white, hard to see line right under their name, right under Dr. So-and-so that says paid actor. That basically says that that person may or may not be a doctor, and even if they are a doctor, they may not be a medical doctor. They may be a doctor of English literature. They may be a doctor of archaeology. Like they could be a different kind of doctor. But what they're doing is using what's called the lever of influence of authority. So basically, they're putting someone in front of you that they think looks like you, the demographic they're trying to reach, that also seems to be smart, right? Oh, well, they're wearing doctor get up and they have doctor in the name, so they obviously went to school. So that you can see them as someone that's like you, and you'll begin to trust them as an authority. Therefore, you'll trust anything that they say. So then when they plug their supplement, their vitamin supplement, or their pre-workout, or whatever it is that they're trying to sell, when they plug it, you're more likely to believe it because you're like, well, that came from an actual doctor, without actually reading the line that says, paid actor right underneath their name, or whatever the case is. These things get used against us all the time. Guys that people that do not just men, people that do advertising and marketing, that's their entire job. Their entire job is to understand the psychology of influence and the psychology of decision making, and their entire job is to influence you to make the decision they want you to make, and they're good at it. They're very, very, very good at it. You know who else is good at it? Politicians. They're extremely good at it. They know who it is they're trying to reach. They know how to look like that person. They know how to act like that person. So when that person sees that the mannerisms, they're like, oh, look, that's a person like me. Let me hear what they have to say. And then that person could say something totally outrageous, totally outlandish, totally whatever, and you're still likely to believe them because of those shortcuts that are hardwired into our brain, those decision-making shortcuts, so that we don't have to spend all of our time looking into all the little details to form an opinion of our own. So if we don't know what to think, we don't know what to do, we look to someone we think looks like us, we look to someone we think is from the same place we're from, or roots for the same sports team we root for, or whatever it might be. And once we find that person and they seem to know what they're talking about, we're just going to believe them just because they seem to know what they're talking about. That's how the brain is wired. So ODD, in my opinion, oppositional defiance disorder, is the most American thing ever, because these guys, these people with ODD, they question everything. They question every authority. They will not follow commands, directions, or otherwise without a good logical reason or good logical consequence for their actions. They have to make the decision for themselves. And so when you're dealing with someone who's been diagnosed with that, ODD, oppositional defiance disorder, it's not the end of the world. You can deal with them, right? You can help them. You can get them to clean their room. You can get them to brush their teeth. All you need to do is give them a logical reason why, which I think is a great way to raise any kid, oppositionally defiant or not, because that way it gets them thinking about consequences. It gets them thinking about the repercussions of their actions and things along those lines. So oppositional defiant kid, I don't want to brush my teeth. I'm not brushing my teeth. And you got to brush your teeth to keep your teeth clean. It keeps your teeth healthy. No, I don't want to, blah, blah, blah. It's a classic ODD thing right there, right? Turns into a big fight, right? Much easier to deal with if you say, okay. Well, you have that choice. You don't have to brush your teeth. But if you don't brush your teeth, let me show you what your teeth will look like in a couple of years. And then you show them a picture of someone like me, like I had a bunch of fillings knocked out several years ago and didn't have enough money and didn't have insurance to be able to get them fixed. So I had holes all the way across, right? Like holes in the top of my teeth cavities all the way across. You can show them a picture of something like that and be like, well, this is what your smile is going to look like if you don't keep them teeth clean. And a lot of times with someone oppositely defiant, they'd be like, ooh, I don't want my teeth to look like that. And you can say, yeah, on top of your teeth looking like that, you'll end up having real bad breath too. I mean, real bad breath. Like, ain't nobody going to want to be within 3 feet of you when you speak. And no one going to want to hear you when you open your mouth, because all they're going to notice is the smell. They're not going to hear you. Oh, yeah, I don't want that. And then that's going to make someone with ODD far more likely to brush their teeth, because you've made logical sense to them now. You've shown why you're the authority on the topic. You've shown why they should listen to you about brushing their teeth, and they will begin to listen to you about brushing their teeth. This is how you deal with kids with ODD, okay? So we deal with it quite a bit, and I mean, 90% of the time, yes, that's a made-up number. No, I don't actually have the stats on this, but I mean, like, it's like 8, 9 times out of 10, a child that comes in here that we're warned has ODD, we might have a little trouble with them in the first 15 minutes, maybe the first whole day. By halfway through the second or third class that they come in, they're following instructions, they're doing just fine, because we know we don't do punishments, right? We don't do punishments. We do use rewards, which is usually the first thing that we try. So if someone with ODD comes in and we go to use a reward and then they start to shut down and get stubborn, that's when we know, okay, not rewards. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to give them the logical reason as to why we're going to do this. We're going to give them the logical reason as to why it's important to focus and pay attention so as not to get hurt or hurt other people. And we're going to give them a specific reason for that. We're going to give them specific anecdotal evidence about it as to what could happen if we're not paying attention. Same thing when it comes to discipline and trying our best. We'll give them a specific anecdotal reasons that are meaningful to them, whatever their age is, as to why they need to try their best, because if they don't, it might not be so great, right? Same thing with confidence, same thing with all the techniques that we do and the games that we play. And, whereas a normal kid, if they're acting up, you can usually say, hey, I need you to focus a little better the rest of the day. We've got 10 minutes left. You focus real good. We'll play a fun game at the end of class or whatever it is. And most kids will perk up. And ODD kid is not going to do that. They don't care. They don't care if that game's going to be at the end of class. What they really want to know is, why do I need to do what we're doing right now? Why do I need to do this? Why is it important that I do this? What is this activity going to teach me? And so if we have someone that gets opposition to defiance, say we're doing a drill or just throwing a front kick on a bag or something, and they say, no, I don't want to. I don't understand why. Whatever it is that they say, no, I'm not going to. You may say, well, that's okay. You don't have to. But if you don't, well, you miss your turn, and you got to go to the back of the line. And also, if you do, you're going to get a lot better at this particular kick, so that when you start sparring, you're going to feel a lot more comfortable in the gear when you go against somebody if you have a few tools you can use against them to make sure that they stay back. And this is one of those tools, right? And usually you explain that, and it's like in a couple of rounds, they'll come back around, Don't believe me? You can talk to our beginner instructors. Mrs. Rose, she's in the comments on Facebook. She's one of those beginner instructors. She deals with this all the time. You can never be afraid to explain why. So here's the thing. My favorite question is why. I have it hanging on my wall in my office. I have it hanging in my mirror in my bathroom. Know your why. I don't do anything without knowing why I'm doing it first. Guess what? Someone with oppositional defiance disorder is the same way. They don't want to do anything until they know why they're doing it, right? So know your why. Now, a lot of parents, I talk to them all the time, and I'll put funny posts out on Facebook and stuff that say, what's the most annoying question your kids ask? And I swear, it's always a stream of comments. I hate when they ask why. I hate when they ask why. I hate when they ask why. You should love when your kids ask why. It means they're not following authority blindly. It means they're willing to question things. It means they want to know why. It means they want to learn why this is important so that they can understand why it is that they do it. If your kids are not asking why, then either A, you're doing a great job of explaining why, or B, they're going to end up being the type of person that will follow anyone and everyone that just looks like them. If someone looks like them, they'll follow what that person has to say, right? And that is, I don't know, man. I don't want to say un-American, right? But in my opinion of it, it kind of feels like it is. You know what I mean? So I would rather a kid ask why constantly and a lot. And I'll tell you, and you guys that ever seen me in class, someone asks me why on something, I'm going to go deep into it. I'm going to tell you exactly why. And that's because I understand why I did it. I understand why I'm doing it, and I can help you understand why you're doing it, right? So the why is ultra important. So don't get annoyed when your kids ask why. I know it can be hard to answer that question right now. Maybe you're annoyed, right? But at least at some point, take some time to calm down and go back and explain to them why. Explain to them why your rule is a rule. Explain to them why the chore they need to do needs done. Explain to them why they're the ones that need to do it, right? You have to explain. If you don't do that and you don't let your kids question why, then you cannot expect them to stand up for themselves to an authority that is abusive towards them, right? Let's say later they get a job, they're an adult now, they get a job, they're working for somebody who's a complete jerk, who's just railroading them, verbal abuse, not paying them like for the hours they work, whatever kind of messed up thing it is. They're less likely to stand up for themselves because you never let them ask why. You say, well, because this is what has to be done. Why? Because it has to be done. Why? Because it's got to be done. You just kind of pass them off with little things like that. Then when they're older, they're used to that. And so they don't ask why of their boss. They don't ask why of the politicians. They don't ask why. And when they don't ask why, they don't understand what's going on around them, right? And when they don't understand what's going on around them, they're going to start using those shortcuts I was talking about for decision making, which allows them to be easily manipulated easily manipulated by the thousands of people who study how to manipulate people for marketing, for advertising, for politics, for, man, the list goes on, right? And there's tons, thousands of people out there in this country alone that are amazing manipulators. It's what they study, it's what they do, and they get you to take shortcuts and make decisions taking shortcuts so that you'll believe what they want you to believe, so that you'll do what they want you to do, so that you'll buy what they want you to buy, right? So in my opinion, there's nothing more valuable, nothing more powerful you can give a kid than promoting them to ask why, than getting them to ask why and refusing to not have an answer. You know what I mean? And absolutely making sure that they get an answer. Because that kid that's willing to ask why and say, no, I'm not doing that until you tell me why we're doing this, that's the kid that's going to become a good leader. That's the kid that's going to understand things that are going on. That's the kid that's going to be able to critically think and be able to make real solid decisions later in life, because they're not relying on someone who looks like them and talks like them to tell them what to do. They're going to figure out what to do on their own. They're going to figure out what fits best for them, right? So I don't see ODD as a bad thing. I see it as one of the most valuable skills a kid can have, to learn to ask why, to learn to question the authority, to learn to question why, you know, the bosses acting the way they are, to question why on all these different things. Because if we as the people don't start questioning, right, if we as the people are not asking why on this stuff, if we as the people aren't figuring this stuff out, then we are at the whim of the few that control us through marketing, through advertising, through campaigns, through everything else, right? And I think we've seen enough over the last 6 years to wake up enough to realize that this is important. That it is important to teach our children to ask why. It is important to teach them that it's okay to ask why. It's important for them to feel like it is okay to stand their ground against authority. There's a meme that goes around, and I think I'll end with this, and this is a great example of what I'm talking about. There's a meme that's been going around for a couple of years that talks about these two kids that are like at one of those lizard handler things, you know, where they bring snakes and lizards and a reptile show, right? And this guy asks this little boy if he wants to hold the snake. And they're like, yeah, I want to hold the snake. The little boy holds the snake. Turns to the girl, asks her if she wants to hold the snake. She says no. And then he makes some comment about how, oh, the girls are normally braver than the boys. I don't know what's going on. You sure you don't want to hold the snake? And she says no again. And then he says something along the lines of, well, just not feeling courageous today, huh? And that's okay, I guess, if you're not feeling very brave today. But the fact of the matter is that child that said no, that was an extreme amount of courage. It was an extreme amount of bravery. They were being pressured by an authority and by their peers to hold the snake and do something that they did not want to do in that moment. And they stood their ground and said no anyway. What is that if that's not courage? What is that if that's not a willingness to stand up to authority, and a willingness to stand up for things you are willing to do and things you're willing or you don't want to do, things that you're not willing to do, right? And I think we want all of our kids to be able to stand up for themselves, right? Both when it comes to their job and authorities, when it comes to politics, when it comes to whatever. We want our kids to be able to stand on their own 2 feet and make good decisions for themselves. That doesn't mean following people that look like them. That doesn't mean following some guy on the TV's opinion. That doesn't mean following some guy on YouTube or some guys on TikTok's opinion because he went on a rant to try to get a bunch of views, because the more views he gets, the more money he can make from advertisers. You know what I mean? Like, that's manipulation. And so the more we allow our kids to ask why, the more we calmly explain to them the real world consequences, the logical reasons behind things, the more likely they are to be well-adjusted adults who can think for themselves. So oppositional defiance disorder, I don't see it as a bad thing. Now remember, I'm talking about, this is different from RAD, R-A-D, right? RAD is similar in ways, but it's more trauma-based, as in being traumatized by an authority, so therefore I'm not going to pay attention to any authority. So that comes out similarly, but it's quite a bit different. It's quite a bit different, and I'm not talking about RAD here. I'm talking about ODD. Okay, I'm talking about oppositional defiance disorder that's often tacked on with kids with ADHD and things along those lines, because kids with ADHD are logical. Kids on the spectrum are logical. So they want to know why. They want to know why they have to follow that rule. They want to know why it is a rule. They want to know, right? And if you just shut them down and say, it's a rule because I said it's a rule, it's a rule to keep people safe, and you never fully explain, like anecdotally, why, then in a way that makes logical sense to them so that they will decide for themselves to follow that rule, then they're going to defy you when it comes to that rule. They're going to defy you every time and constantly, right? So I don't see it as a bad thing. So let me hit some of these comments before I jump off here. Yeah, shouldn't be afraid to explain why. If we can't explain why and we don't even know why ourselves, then maybe it shouldn't be a rule, right? Yeah, so let's go back to when I was talking about that age-old thing about, you're going to sit here until they eat the rest of your food. And I said that if someone's oppositional defiance and you're trying to make them finish their plate and they feel hungry, you're going to have a hard time coming up with a logical reason that's going to convince them as to why they need to finish their plate. You really, really are. So in that case, that's a battle you probably shouldn't be picking as an adult. In that case, wrap the food up, put it in the fridge for later. Eat it yourself if they don't, right? It doesn't have to go to waste just because the kid didn't eat what was on their plate. Maybe don't put so much food on the plate. But either way, that's one of those rules that people used to have. You don't get up from the table until you eat your plate. That was a rule when I was a kid in many households. And the fact of the matter is it doesn't matter how you try to explain that rule. It's not going to make any logical sense to most people who want to know why they have to finish that food, especially if they're sitting there full going, I don't need it. I don't need that food, right? And so in that case, that's a battle you just shouldn't even pick. That's a battle you shouldn't be doing with someone who questions authority, with someone who asks why. Instead, just save the drama. Just wrap the food up, put it away. You can eat it later. It's not going to waste just because it's still on their plate. It can be wrapped up, right, and eaten later. It's not life or death. So another thing on dealing with kids with ODD or kids that question why, encourage it, but also at the same time be understanding that you're going to have to pick your battles. You're going to have to pick the battles that you know you can win. Well, we have to act in this way so that we don't break the couch and have to buy another one. I don't have the money to buy another one, and I'm sure you want a place to sit while you're playing video games or watching TV. That would be a consequence that makes sense as to why to not jump on the couch, for example, right? So if you can come up with something logical as to why they shouldn't be doing it, then great, fantastic. They're going to be more likely to listen to you. If you can't or you lose your temper, they're going to become defiant. And that's where you get your oppositional defiant disorder. So if it's a rule that you cannot explain yourself why, you cannot explain logically why, then maybe it shouldn't be a rule. Maybe it shouldn't be a rule. If someone questions your authority and questions your rule, and you cannot tell them why, then maybe you don't need to be the authority. Or maybe, as the authority, that rule doesn't need to be there if you can't explain why. Like, I do this on multiple levels. I've got my students, right? I've got my instructors, my staff, which are also still students, right? I've got all of this stuff, and I know I could, within my rights as an authority, to start a rule in this studio and not explain it to anybody and expect everybody to follow it. I know that's well within my right, and I could demand that people follow whatever rule it is that I came up with, and I could demand that they follow it without having to explain myself, and I know that's well within my right. But I also know that that is not going to help people trust me as a teacher. That's not going to help people trust me as an authority. That's not going to help my staff members trust me at all. That's going to lead to them talking behind my back like, who does he think he is? He doesn't even understand what's going on, blah, 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 blah. But if I come up with a rule and I can explain exactly why that rule is there, look, this is to protect ourselves from this situation. This is why we have to do it this way. And I know my why and I explain my why, then my staff is 100% behind me. My students mostly will follow in suit as well. But the staff will be 100% behind me as long as I can explain why we're doing it that way, why it needs to be done that way. So it's all about knowing your why. So next comment, I think it's next one. Force kids to eat like that only creates eating disorders. That's true. It does create eating disorders. Basically, here's the thing. So I didn't necessarily grow up exactly with that rule, but I was in a lot of households growing up that had that rule. And I was exhibiting behaviors that would be considered ODD today, oppositionally defiant, usually related to that rule specifically, because that was a hill at 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. That was a hill I was willing to die on. Right? I'm full. I'm not eating anymore. But you only ate 2 pieces of broccoli. Okay, well, I'm full. I'm not eating anymore. Sorry. Right? That was a hill that I would have died on as a kid. Right? I would stay on that hill. And still to this day, after that, I have this weird psychological thing where I cannot finish a plate of food. I can't.
One bite.
I leave one bite every time. One bite. And I can't stop myself from doing it. I can't. The second I could be hungry and eating, and the second there's one bite left on the plate, my stomach suddenly says, oh no, you're too full. You can't even have one more bite. And I know I could, but something in my brain tells me not to. And guys, it all comes from how many times I sat at that dinner table until 4 o'clock in the morning because I was not going to eat the rest of that food, and they were not going to let me get up until I did. And so now to this day, most places I go, even if I could eat a full plate, I leave one bite, and I cannot stop myself from doing it. It is a form of an eating disorder, right? It's the same thing. It's the same type of thing. Now, what I have is not an eating disorder, but that's the type of symptoms that happen that end up causing eating disorders. It's dangerous to follow people blindly. Absolutely it is. I tell my students all the time, question everything I tell you. Test everything I show you. If I show you techniques, and I want you guys to work cooperatively until you get and understand the techniques. But then when it comes down to resistance time, comes down to resistance training time, sparring time, grappling time, things like that, I expect you to test what I tell you. Because what works for me may not work for you. What works for so-and-so may not work for you, right? And so I tell my students all the time, don't trust everything I say, question it. Look it up yourself. Look for other sources, right? Think on it, right? Think on it yourself. Most of the stuff I talk about is either science-based, because like science of striking and tactics, and then the other half of what I talk about is philosophy-based, which there's no necessarily right or wrong answers. It's like preferred and not preferred type stuff, right? And I tell my students all the time, please do question me. If you don't like something I said about integrity, you don't like something I said about compassion, then question me. Question me. Let's have that talk. I don't mind. I'm not going to get frustrated. I'm not going to get upset because someone questions my authority. If I tell you the science behind striking, the three main physics principles behind speed breaking, if I explain those things to you and why they cause a lot more pain, right, and you don't believe me, good. Good. Don't believe me. Let's set up some science experiments together to test it. I will be happy because I've got tons of ways that I can show all three principles in basically a more or less science experiment where we can test it. I actually might do a video on that if I can get someone willing to take a shot to the stomach. We talked about doing a video about speed versus strength where basically we have two of us, both of us are going to take a shot to the stomach. One is going to be hard, a lot of strength, as much muscle as we can throw into it. And one that's going to be super fast, like a whip with a rock at the end, right? Our normal way, our preferred technique for speed breaking and striking. And then that'll happen to each of us, and then we'll rate, how much pain for each one. We'll do it real scientific-like, right? And we can do this for types of collision. We can do this for all kinds of things. I'll do the science experiments with you. Or you don't want to do that with me? Okay, go look up the principles I tell you about. Look up elastic versus inelastic collision. Look up the math behind transfer of kinetic energy between two objects. Look up, how to calculate pressure in pounds per square inch and things along those lines. And you'll see the same things that I was telling you. But I will feel so much better if you don't just take my word for it. I'll feel a lot better if I know my students are questioning things, because if there's one thing I want to teach my students, it's to question things. Question authority. Question me. Question things. Figure it out for yourself. Because that is the real power, right? That's the real power. When you can learn to figure out things for yourself instead of just blindly following someone that looks like you or someone that you like, because that's the easier way to make decisions. All right, till I see you guys again, be the best teammate you can be the best at being you. Oh, my thing's not touchscreen. Ha!